The smell hit first, not the stench of battle, not burning wood or scorched earth, something worse, sweeter. Rot mixed with perfume. The kind of smell that clings to your throat and won't leave. In the Forum, where marble once gleamed white under the Mediterranean sun, bodies lay uncollected for the third day. Senators, merchants, beggars. It didn't matter anymore. The plague didn't read social registers. A child's sandal sat abandoned near the Temple of Saturn. Small, leather straps still tied. The kind of detail that haunts you when you realize nobody came back for it. Rome was dying. But not from war, not from invasion. From something you couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't crucify or legislate away. The greatest empire the world had ever known was collapsing from the inside, and most people didn't even know it yet. The senators who still showed up to sessions, maybe half now down from the hundreds who'd once packed the curia, pretended normalcy. They debated aqueduct maintenance while corpses rotted 3 streets over. They voted on grain subsidies for a population that was abandoning the city in droves. Denial has its own gravity. The closer you get to the end, the harder it becomes to look directly at it. Rewind. 50 years earlier, Rome didn't smell like death. It smelled like possibility. Morning in the Subura district, bread baking in clay ovens, olive oil warming in bronze pans, the sharp tang of wine fermenting in cellars beneath tenement blocks. 1 million people crammed into a city built for half that. The noise alone could drive you mad. Hawkers shouting, wagon wheels on cobblestone, 1,000 conversations bleeding into one roar. But it worked. Aqueducts carried water from mountains 40 miles away, engineering marvels that defied simple comprehension. 11 of them, feeding fountains, baths, private homes. Public baths held more people than entire Germanic villages. You could walk into the Colosseum and watch men fight lions before lunch, then attend a poetry reading at a senator's villa by evening. The same day, the same city. The legions controlled everything from Britannia's mist-covered hills to Mesopotamia's desert cities. Roman roads, straight as spear shafts, built to last centuries, connected the world like veins carrying lifeblood. Roman law gave those roads meaning. Roman grain ships, massive things with hulls big enough to house families, brought wheat from Egypt's delta to feed the sprawl. It felt permanent, like physics, like the seasons, like something that simply was and always would be. In the Senate, old men with wine-stained togas argued about taxation rates in Gaul and eastern border skirmishes with Parthia. Boring problems. Management problems. The kind you have when you've already won, when conquest is complete and all that remains is administration. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody ever does. The thing about collapse is that it doesn't announce itself. No trumpets, no declarations, no clear beginning you can point to and say, there, that's when it started. Just small cracks that widen while you're looking elsewhere. The grain ships from Alexandria started arriving late. Not every time, just sometimes. A week here, 2 weeks there. Bureaucrats filed reports in triplicate. Senators nodded during budget meetings. The city's grain reserves were vast. Months of supplies stacked in warehouses along the Tiber's muddy banks. No crisis, not yet. But in North Africa, something had shifted beneath the surface. Vandal raiders, groups Rome barely considered human, had started taking coastal cities, not for glory, not for plunder, for farmland, for permanence. The granary of the empire, the breadbasket that fed Rome's 1 million mouths, was being carved up by men who couldn't even read Latin. Rome raised taxes to fund legions to take it back. Taxes went up in Gaul, in Hispania, in Italia itself. Landed aristocrats who'd paid modest sums for generations suddenly faced demands that consumed 1/3 of their annual yields. They passed those costs down because they could, to tenant farmers, to laborers, to people already eating barley porridge twice a day because wheat cost too much. People started leaving, not in waves, not in organized migrations, in trickles. A family here, a village there, heading east, where land was cheaper and tax collectors scarcer. The countryside began to empty like water draining from a cracked basin. Fewer farmers meant less food. Less food meant higher prices in Rome. Higher prices meant riots. The first one started over the price of olive oil. Stupid, really. A merchant at a stall near the Esquiline Gate had raised his rate by 3 coins. 3. But when you're hungry, when your children have been hungry for months, when the basic dignity of feeding your family slips further from reach each week, 3 coins feels like robbery. The mob burned his shop, then the one next door, then the whole block. The Praetorian Guard restored order by nightfall. Order in this case meant bodies in the street and a curfew that lasted 3 weeks. The Guard had stopped being protectors decades ago. Now they were just enforcers, blunt instruments. But the message was sent both ways. The people had rage, the state had swords. For now the swords won, but swords need to be paid. And the treasury was running dry. In the palace on Palatine Hill, emperors changed like seasons. Assassination, coup, plague, natural causes that looked suspiciously unnatural when you examined the wine cup or the dinner guest list. It didn't matter. The throne had become a death sentence with a crown attached. 26 emperors in 50 years. Some lasted months. One lasted 3 weeks before his own guards gutted him in his sleep. Each new emperor made promises. Grain subsidies, tax relief, military victories, grand building projects that would restore Rome's glory. Each one failed to deliver because the problems were structural, systemic, baked into the foundation like cracks in old concrete. But you can't execute a system. You can't blame marble and mortar, so they blamed each other. Generals turned legions into personal armies, loyal to commanders who paid them, not to abstractions like Rome or the Senate. Regions declared independence, then collapsed under their own weight, then begged to return to the imperial fold. The borders flexed like a dying animal's lungs, expanding, contracting, gasping for air that wouldn't come. And through it all, Rome the city kept pretending. Chariot races still packed the Circus Maximus every week. Gladiators still fought in arenas across the empire. Poets still recited in gardens where fountains bubbled over imported stones from quarries in Egypt and Greece. If you squinted, if you stayed in the right neighborhoods, if you had enough money to insulate yourself, you could convince yourself nothing had changed. But at night, you could hear it. Silence. Whole apartment blocks stood empty, windows dark, doors swinging open on broken hinges. Shops shuttered permanently, the owners fled or dead. Entire streets dark because nobody could afford lamp oil and nobody dared walk them anyway. Gangs controlled the Subura now, not organized crime, just desperate men taking what they needed to survive. The city was hollowing out from within, a shell of marble hiding rot. Then the Goths came, not as conquerors, as refugees. Tens of thousands of them flooding across the Danube frontier, fleeing something worse to the east. Huns, they said, horsemen who ate raw meat and drank blood and moved like a storm front across the steppe. The Goths wanted safety, land, a place inside the empire's borders where the Huns wouldn't follow. Rome said yes, barely, reluctantly. After weeks of debate, they were settled in Thrace, given land that was technically imperial property, promised food and supplies. Integration, the bureaucrats called it, a solution that benefited everyone. But the food never came, or it came spoiled, grain mixed with chaff and weevils, or it came in quantities meant for half their number while Roman officials skimmed the supplies, sold the rest on black markets, pocketed the difference. The Goths starved, their children starved, so they stopped asking permission. They took farms, livestock, grain stores. Roman citizens in the region fled to walled cities or died trying. The legions marched east to push them back, to restore order, to remind these barbarians who ruled this world. At Adrianople, the two forces met. The battle lasted an afternoon. By sunset, 2/3 of the Eastern Roman army was dead. An emperor, face down in a field, armor stripped by scavengers who didn't care about his titles, joined them. Rome had lost battles before. Cannae, Teutoburg Forest, defeats that shook the Republic and Empire alike. But this was different. This wasn't Hannibal at the gates with a master strategy. This wasn't Spartacus making temporary trouble. This was something new. a failure of imagination, the realization that Rome's enemies no longer feared her, because fear requires belief, and belief in Rome was dying. The plague arrived on a grain ship from Carthage, a Tuesday, midsummer, the kind of hot day where the city baked and the smell from the sewers made your eyes water. Nobody noticed at first. A few dock workers got sick, fever, vomiting, darkening of the skin around the lymph nodes, swelling that looked like black fruit growing beneath the flesh. They died within days. Their families burned the bodies quickly, whispered prayers to gods old and new, moved on, but it didn't stop. It spread through the Subura like fire through dry wheat. Tenement blocks became morgues, entire families gone in a week, grandparents, parents, children erased like they'd never existed. The authorities tried quarantine, sealing buildings from the outside, trapping the sick with the healthy. But you can't quarantine a city where people live stacked 6 stories high, sharing walls thinner than your hand, climbing between buildings on makeshift bridges. The wealthy fled to country villas in the hills. The poor had nowhere to go. Within a month, bodies piled faster than they could be burned, the Tiber filled with corpses, bloated and bobbing against the bridges. Funeral pyres burned day and night on the Campus Martius, turning the sky grey with ash that settled on rooftops like snow. People stopped going outside unless they had no choice. The markets closed, the baths closed. Even the churches, those new Christian gathering places that had been spreading through the empire like weeds through cracked pavement, went silent. Rome, the city of a million voices, went quiet. In that silence, you could hear your own heartbeat and wonder if it would stop. And still the barbarians came, not with grand armies, not with siege towers and battering rams, with slow, grinding pressure. Vandals in the south, Franks in the north, Goths who'd been settled, betrayed, and radicalized into something Rome had created but could no longer control. They didn't sack cities for gold anymore. They settled them, moved in with families, raised children, started calling themselves Roman, while Rome itself forgot what the word meant. The legions pulled back inch by inch, year by year. Britannia was abandoned, too far, too expensive, not worth defending. The Rhine frontier collapsed when troops weren't paid for 8 months and simply walked away. Provinces that had paid taxes for centuries stopped sending them, not out of rebellion, out of irrelevance. There was no center left to send them to. In 410, Alaric and his Goths walked into Rome itself, not as destroyers, as victors claiming a prize they'd already won. The city opened its gates because it had no choice. The walls were crumbling, maintained by nobody. The granaries were empty. The Praetorian Guard had disbanded 6 months earlier for lack of pay. They looted for 3 days gold art, statues, anything valuable enough to carry. Then they left. Rome survived, technically, but the myth died. For 800 years, Rome had been untouchable, eternal. The city that couldn't fall. Now everyone knew it could. The last Western Roman emperor was a teenager named Romulus, ironic really, named after the founder, the child who suckled a wolf and built an empire. This Romulus built nothing, ruled nothing, was placed on a throne by his father, a military commander who thought proximity to power meant something. It didn't. In 476, a German warlord named Odoacer decided he was tired of the charade. He didn't want to be emperor. He just wanted the boy gone. So he pensioned Romulus off to a villa in Campania, a comfortable retirement for the empire's final act, a stipend, servants, a quiet life. Nobody mourned, nobody rioted. The Senate barely noticed. Rome, the idea, the state, the eternal city, ended not with fire or conquest but with a shrug. The eastern half would survive another 1,000 years as Byzantium, speaking Greek, worshipping differently, remembering a legacy they couldn't reclaim. But the West? Gone. Now you're reading this on a device assembled in 12 countries, powered by rare metals, mined by people you'll never meet, whose names you'll never know. Connected to networks controlled by corporations richer than empires, more powerful than most nations. You live in a world of supply chains so complex that nobody fully understands them anymore, where bread appears in stores like magic, where water flows from walls with the turn of a handle, where the lights always turn on, where the Internet never stops, until they don't. Rome didn't fall because of barbarians, it fell because complexity collapsed, because systems built over centuries fractured when the foundation shifted, because people stopped believing the center could hold, and they were right. The aqueducts still stand in some places, crumbling, overgrown, empty. They'll outlast us, probably, but they don't carry water anymore. Ask yourself, what are you depending on that feels permanent? What structures do you trust without questioning? What invisible threads hold your world together? The power grid, the financial system, the government, the supply chain that puts food on your table and medicine in your cabinet. How fragile are they, really? I don't have the answers, but I know history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And right now, if you listen closely beneath the noise of your daily life, you can hear the echo, the same patterns, the same cracks forming, the same people pretending everything's fine while the ground shifts beneath their feet. Rome fell slowly, then all at once. I'll be here when you're ready to hear more. Until then, stay curious, stay awake, and pay attention to the small things that stop working, because that's how it starts.